Hey, how's it going? So we have this nice little application here and it's connected to a backend. So in the last video, if you caught it, you would remember that we have this thing now that we can actually create accounts and we can actually try to log into them too. We're getting this error message when we're trying to log into an invalid account or we put the wrong password or something like that. Now that we have the entire backend system all created, we can start using it on our front end to actually let our users register their accounts. And if something goes wrong, they'll see the error message on the page. Now, real quick, I just want to change some things in our backend with this whole error handling thing. Now, if you just clicked here and joined us for the first time, I'll have timestamps in the description for you to skip ahead to the parts that you need to know. Anyways, the first thing that we're going to do is actually head over to our resolvers. And I'll explain to you a mistake that we've made in the series and how we can fix it. So right now you see here that we're returning an error and a message, an error message, whenever we encounter an error. However, this way of handling errors is actually inefficient and it's actually a noob move. So Apollo client, which is our GraphQL client on the front end, handles errors or has the ability to catch errors when you set it up correctly. Now, what we're doing here is inefficient and it's not correct. So simply just, if you're following along the series, you just basically erase this. There will be no try catch block because whenever an error is thrown in this resolver, it will be returned to our user here. And we're going to test it out real quick. I'll just show you. So here, if I do that in the login page as well, the login resolver, we get rid of this error handling mechanism here. When we try to log into an invalid account, it will throw the error. And you see here, the error message is still here. So in reality, we do not need to handle them on our own. And all of this information is only given when we're in development. So that's why what we were doing was actually incorrect or inefficient, I would say. And since we're not returning errors anymore, we can just get rid of the error as well as the error message from our resolvers. Like this, we can just get rid of the error and we can go in our schema definition over here in types and just completely get rid of anything having to do with an error. And the login or the registration response, if I can find it here, it will have no error either. And the login response doesn't need a message, and now everything should be working. So now we cannot actually get a query for errors or in our mutation. So now everything's working as it should. So I'm just going to close these windows and we're going to get started working on the front end. Now, the first thing that we need to do before we can actually start interacting with our backend is we need to write our GraphQL queries and mutations. So if you've been following along, you know that we have that located here in GraphQL and in queries. So here we have this file, and here we will be writing our GraphQL mutations, which will be used on the front end and sent over to the back end from React. And we have typegen set up, so it detects this file and it generates all the types, so everything is working with TypeScript. So we can literally just start writing in here, which is pretty neat. So I'm just gonna first of all write the mutation to register a user, and we can just call that register account, and it'll take in some variables. We can call it credentials in this case. And the type of this is login credentials. Now, you want to be careful here because this is technically not type safe in this file. But anyways, you will get an error when starting your server if this is not correct. So here, this is a required field. And inside of this, we just want to run the create account mutation. Now, we will pass in our credentials as the variable. And that variable will be passing in through Apollo client along with our request. And so all we need is just the message. So this status message, which tells our user to check their email, or an error message, which tells them, listen, account is taken, or something went wrong, basically. And I'm just going to write as well the login mutation. So I'm just going to call it login. And it'll be something very similar. So I'm actually just going to copy this over and just call this login. It will take the credentials as well. And this one, it will run a different mutation, and it's just the login one, which we set up in a previous video, and we just want the username back. And so when we run this mutation, the cookie is set on the browser. All we need is basically the username back just to confirm that everything went through right. And we can store the username in the front end, and we'll handle that later in the series. Don't worry about that. So now we're done writing these mutations, and we can actually start using them in our front end code. So now I'm gonna head over to my components and my register component. Now this component is being rendered in the top level of our application. So here we've left this empty on the onSubmit of our form. So when the user submits this form, nothing happens. We're just printing the values to the console. So the first thing we need to do is actually take a hold of these values. And the reason we need to take a hold of this is because we need to reset the form, which will reset our values. And then after we reset the form, we want to do the asynchronous operation. The reason we want to do this is so that the user, if maybe the connection is slow, we don't want them to have values in their form while the network request is still going through. It'll make it seem like a very bad user experience. So that's why we need to empty the form before we send a request over. So here we can do a try catch block because Apollo client detects errors and it throws them so we can catch them, right? Now, before we can actually send a request, we need access to that specific mutation that we wrote in our other file. So in case the type generation didn't run, we need to go over here and basically do yarn run generate. This will generate the hooks that we're going to use on our front end. So if you've kept up with the series, I have a video setting everything up where you can just write a mutation here or a query or anything, and then it'll generate a React hook that you can use to automatically run this mutation. It's pretty cool. So now here we can just use the hook. It'll be called use register account mutation. Now this takes in some options. And generally, I always do this, notify on network status change to true. So here we'll have access to the register mutation, and you can call it whatever you want. We'll just call it the register mutation. So now we can go here in our try catch block and just do const data, and we destructure that, is equal to await register mutation. Now we need to make this an asynchronous function for this to work. And so in here, it's very important that we don't forget to pass in the variables because it's actually expecting some variables. So we pass in the credentials, and then here's very important that we specify the email creds.email, the username creds.username, and then the password is credentials.password. So now we're running that mutation on the submission of our register form. Now we have access to this data that's returned to us. The data that's returned to us, if you recall over here when we wrote the mutation, it's literally just a message. It can mean error message or anything. We know that if we go to this line of code here, there was no error, so the message is not an error message. However, when we go here, we know that the error message that's given here in this error variable, it is an actual error message, so we can treat it as one. This will let us display error messages in red and good messages in green or black or whatever you want. So to store this message in our state and use it in our component, we actually need to use the useState hook. So here I'm going to do useState, and this will be a string, but it will be undefined at first. And of course we need to import that. So here we'll call this error message or set error message. And then we need two of those. So this will be status message or set status message. And that'll be undefined at first. So over here, if we get a response and everything went correctly, we can safely say set status message to data dot create account dot message. And then down here we basically do the same thing, except it will be error dot or not dot, it would just be the actual error that was thrown. And we actually need to cast this as an Apollo error before we continue, and then we have access to the message now. So really that's all we need. We can use this form now to register, but we're still not displaying our error messages. And here I forgot to change the hook. Okay, so I'm going to create a component that takes in an error message and a status message as props and displays them accordingly, just to keep our registration component organized, because we're going to use that same logic in our login page because it's the same thing. So here I'm going to call it status text.tsx. And I'm just going to initialize that. And then I'm going to say this takes in some props. Now this will be error message, which is a string, and status message, which is also a string. So here we can do, this is a functional component, and we make it type safe with those props. So now we have access to error message or status message. And now we can do something that's really cool. So we can do, if there's an error message or there's a status message, and I'll use the new operator, then we want to render, let's say, a div. If not, and this should be a question mark. So if one of these are true, we render a div. In the case that we don't have any messages, we just render null. So here we can change this to a heading from Chalker UI. And we can do something else. We can do color is equal to, if there's an error message, the color will be red dot, and we can just say here 500. And if there's no error message, it will just be a normal text. In our case, we want to do it in green, 500 as well. As the text, we want to render either the error message or the status message. And just to be consistent, I'll use the new operator that's available. So this gives priority to the error message. So if we have both types of messages, the most important one is the error messages, but to be honest, we cannot get two messages if we can only return one from the resolver. So that will not be a problem in our case. Now that we have that, we can simply go in our register component here and render status text, and then pass it error message, and it's just equal to error message, and status message is equal to status message. Now, if I named those correctly, which I did, we can simply just go over to our login component and do something that's the same thing basically. And we want to do the same thing with these hooks. So over in our login page, we also have two hooks like that. And we will also use the useState hook. And so we'll go over here to the onSubmit. And here what we can do is I'll actually just copy the code from this onSubmit, and I'll quite just paste it. And let me do that. However, instead of the register mutation, I'll be running the login mutation, and that means that we need to use it up here. So const login mutation is equal to use login mutation. And so similarly, I'm also going to pass in the notify on network status change. And so now what we're going to do is something different than we did for our registration. When a user logs in correctly, we don't want to display any message. What we want to do is simply redirect them to the home page. And in the next video, we're going to have it set up so the home page, our index page, actually detects if our user's logged in and shows them different content according to their login status. So here we can simply do router.push and just send them over to the login page, which in our case is still the registration page, but stay tuned for next video for how to fix that. And something's wrong here, and we fix that. And this needs to be in asynchronous function. And in this video, we're not going to be using the data, but for now, I'll just be console logging data dot user or dot login dot username, and this has to be like that. But for now, we can just log into the console. So now, as we have things set up now, we can log in and register. But the last thing we need to do is actually show the error messages. So we can get rid of status message, and we only need error message. And over here, we just don't pass in status message, and everything stays exactly the same. So now we have no accounts in our database, so I can just go ahead and register a user. So I'll call it Alice Hi, and the username and the password are the same thing. So let's sign ourselves up. So we signed up. Now this is looking pretty ugly, so let me go to the status text component and actually configure it to have a font size of large and text align center. That's a lot better. Okay, so now thanks for registering. Check your email for instructions on how to verify your account. Let's go ahead and do that. So I'm gonna go here and click on the email. Now we're registered, and now we can log in with those credentials. So I'll just input my information. And over here in the application, you'll see that a cookie will be created. So first of all, let me just put in the wrong username and see what happens. Incorrect username or password. So this is exactly what we were looking to do. So now let's actually log in. And you see here, if you look closely, a cookie was created. Now the path is at /API. So the problem with this is that this cookie will not be sent to requests that are located at the root or the root path of our application. So basically, when a user connects to just anything that's not /API, the cookie is not sent. And that's a problem because we're using Next.js and we need access to that cookie when we're rendering their page. So then we can give them different pages depending on if they're logged in or not. So to fix that is really, really simple. You just go over here to the resolver that created that cookie. Over here, I believe it was, or no, it was over here in the login one. And all we need to do is go in here and configure the path to be just the root path or the /. So now we can get rid of this and let's log in again. So Alice Hi, and it's, oh, that's sign up. Let me go here then. Go ahead. Now we logged in, and over here the path is exactly how we asked for it to be. So that's basically it. Now the accounts are being created, the cookies are being set, and the cookie being set on the browser is really what keeps the user logged in, because now whenever we send a request to our server, the server can see that a cookie is there, verify it, and then do things accordingly. So if it's verified and the token is real and it's legit, then we know that they're authorized to access certain resources that we want to restrict. We are technically logged in still. When we refresh this page, we are logged in because there's a cookie, but our server doesn't know anything about that. It's not doing anything with that information. So it doesn't look like we're logged in, but we actually are logged in. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.